population, Regulus current system, and tidal dynamics. He's also interested in the statistical nature of oceanic and atmospheric observations, and he is an expert in time series analysis and covariance analysis. Shane is also co-chair of the US CLIVR, a UQ working group, and today he will actually wear that hat and present to us about the working group. Thanks, Shane.
Thank you very much, Donata, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this session to present the group. So I guess I need to share my screen, and I cannot share my screen. The host has disabled that. Or maybe if someone wants to share my presentation, and I can ask you to advance. Up to you.
Try now. I made you a co-host. I don't know what I'm doing here.
Okay. Let's see. I'm going to share Google Chrome. Sorry, I thought we could have done that before. I need to quit Zoom and come back. So I'm going to do that very quickly. Sorry.
Okay, we'll chat amongst ourselves. Good luck. It's never good to be the first speaker, I think.
Yeah, and there's bound to be technical difficulties with these kinds of things, aren't there?
I don't see the option to expressly enable one participant to share.
Have you looked at the advanced sharing options?
Yeah, no, not advanced.
Yeah, it's in the share screen, and there's an advanced option. That's where it is.
Yeah, and so it's, I see all participants who can start sharing when someone else is sharing.
There's one backup option. We can also plan to share the slides ourselves.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
Looks good.
Okay, great. And I have 15.
Yes, I can.
Awesome. And I have 15 minutes, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, sorry for the delay. Here we go. And if I do this, you can see it in full screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, thank you for the introduction. My name is Shannon Lipo, and today I want to talk to you about the US CLIVR Working Group on Ocean Uncertainty Quantification. And since it's a little bit of a mouthful, we decided to come up with the name Ocean UQ, an acronym or condensed name. And we have as well as a logo designed by Kyla Drushka, one of our co-chair for this group. And here I've put a couple of URLs as well of our Twitter feed, as well as some more information from the US CLIVR websites. So because this is an international meeting and we have a variety of a diverse audience, I wanted to first just give you a little introduction on what is US CLIVR. So US CLIVR is a US-based research program, and it has a mission, which is to foster understanding and prediction of climate variability and change. And it has also a mission to serve the climate community and society through coordination and facilitation of research and looking at outstanding climate questions. So US CLIVR, if you want, contributes to the US Global Change Research Program, as well as contribute to the International CLIVR program of the World Climate Research Program, which is under the auspices of the United Nations. And US CLIVR is funded by the funding agencies of the US that support oceanography, basically NASA, the National Science Foundation, the NOAA, the Department of Energy, as well as the Office of Naval Research. So CLIVR is a program, it's an organization, and I've been personally involved in it for the last 4 years. The science goals of US CLIVR are to understand the role of the oceans in climate, to understand the processes exactly that contribute to climate variability and change, and as well as better quantify the uncertainty in the observation, simulation, prediction, and projection of climate variability and change. improve the development and evaluation of climate simulations and prediction, and collaborate with research and operational communities that develop and use climate information. So it's really part of the the goals of US CLIVAR to look at quantification of uncertainty in ocean science. And that's from the 2013 science plan, which is planned for the 15 years following 2013. So US CLIVAR has a number of activities, and one of the activities of US CLIVAR is that it actually funds working groups looking at specific topics for a time span of typically 3 years. There's a number of working groups currently active, supported by US CLIVAR. One is on data science, one is on Earth interaction, one is on large ensemble for climate research, one is on water isotopes, and you have the ocean uncertainty quantification working group. And just as a note, if you are based in the US or if you're working with US scientists, there's currently a call for the next round of working groups. And there's a call every year to fund new working groups. So if you're interested, just look it up. So for the Ocean UQ working group motivations, so what were the motivations of the people that put this group together? So we noticed that with the increasing amount of data, available in oceanography to do our work, it actually exacerbates the limitations associated with the quantification of uncertainties. Typically, sometimes you would have a data set with no formal error estimates, and then you would have a choice between two different data sets that were supposed to represent the same physical quantity, and one would have error estimates and one would not have error estimates. So how to compare them properly. And then we also have new challenges that have arisen from combined analysis of in situ, remote, and model data. If you look at a model, if you look at observations, they have different representation scale in time and in space. One may have a formal error, one may not have an error, they may have different definitions. So how do you combine those different type of observations and model or remote data? And then we also noticed, unfortunately, that the concept itself of uncertainty quantification is actually absent from seminal documents related to ocean observations, such as the framework for ocean observing that came out of OceanObs 09, as well as the Global Ocean Observing System 2030 strategy. That document doesn't actually mention the concept of uncertainty quantification. So we think that this should be addressed. And then, unfortunately, sometimes we noticed a lack of statistical literacy in ocean sciences, which is, basically we're dealing with data. The data of science is statistics. So there is a lack of knowledge that sometimes arises. So for this working group, we led a proposal with Carla Droshka, who is a principal oceanographer at the Applied Physics Laboratory of the University of Washington, Anish Subramaniam, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Atmospheric and Ocean Science at the University of Colorado Boulder, and myself at the University of Miami Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science. We led a proposal, and so our goals, basically our aims, were to develop strategies and identify best practices for improving the understanding, derivation, communication, and utilization of the uncertainties of ocean in situ, remote, and model products related to physical variables. So just as a note, just for limiting the scope of our activities within 3 years, and given our time and working members, we limited ourselves to physical variables of the ocean. But of course, we're going to try to branch out, and we do interact through our work with other fields of oceanography, such as biological or chemical oceanography. But for this working group in particular, we decided to focus first on physical variables. Our activities and objectives for this working group. We have 3 consecutive objectives. The first one, which we thought was a tool, was basically to develop a community-driven web platform for uncertainty quantification knowledge and strategies. Our second objective is to produce a number of peer-reviewed open access articles on uncertainty quantification for observational and model ocean data. And then finally, the last major activity of this working group will be to organize a summer school or a workshop on uncertainty quantification. So I put a summer school or workshop because this is something that we want to decide further on as we discuss our activities. Our group members, so we have about a dozen of members. So because we are a US-based organization, most of them are based in the US, but we also have international partners. So you can see the list here on the slide. So we've tried to have a diverse group of people at different level of career, as well as trying to balance gender as well as equity. But what we're very proud of is that we have a very wide expertise, including observational physical oceanography, remote sensing, the cryosphere, weather, climate, data assimilation, modeling, as well as philosophy of science and statistics. And we're very happy to have statisticians on board that have a strong interest in ocean sciences. So one of the first activity, and we started in April 20, and it's been a very hard year for everybody, but one of the first things we're trying to put together, and we've started to put together, is a web platform. And this is just a screenshot of that web platform that basically is going to have a number of sections, an about section explaining our goals and our mission, another section called a blog section, which basically we're going to invite all our group members. We're going to have all our group members contributing some blog posts to talk about specific aspects of ocean and solidity quantification that they are familiar with or that they are interested in. And we want this to be maybe a launching platform for discussion. So we want to have this blog post to be rather candid and accessible to a wide audience, but nevertheless an audience of scientists. We are scientists and we want to talk to scientists, new scientists, or even like more senior scientists. We're going to have a learn section where we are planning on compiling resources on uncertainty quantification. Hopefully, maybe we'll have a number of learning modules that could be accessible for the people who visit the sites. And then we're going to have a news section, which is going to talk about the different activities of the group, as well as meetings, as well as publication of interest or news items that could be of interest for the group. So this is basically our skeleton plan for the web platform. And we are asking our members to contribute to the blogs. Hopefully in a couple of months, we'll launch the first blog post, which has been written by Kyla Drushka. And I believe Kyla is actually going to give a talk for one of the sessions for this specific OBPS working group on how variability can masquerade as uncertainty. And I really like the use of masquerade. It's not used very often. I think it could be very appealing. So we're trying to make those blog posts appealing and questioning for people. So here's one example. So I think for the purpose of giving a talk for this workshop, the lead of the session have asked us to think about recommendations. So I don't really have recommendations for the OBPS activities, but what I'm very glad is that we have Mark Bushnell to be one of our working group member, US CLIVAR working group members. So hopefully having Mark on board will allow us to liaise with OBPS as well as your activities related to uncertainty quantification. And then we are inviting OBPS members or anybody interested in the topic to contribute to our workshop, as well as get involved in our community white papers. We also invite people interested in contributing guest blog posts for our website, for our platform. And then really for the discussion section or questions we're going to have after, what are our ideas? How do you think that our working group could be advancing our common agenda here, which is, I guess, to deal with ocean uncertainty quantification? How can we use our web platform? How could we best use our activities to serve our common goal? So if you have suggestions, I'm very happy. We're all very happy to discuss. So this working group is a work in progress. And so we are hoping to fully engage the community with our web platform starting in 2021. And so right now, if you want to get involved or know about our activities, please follow us on Twitter, which is the media platform we have decided to use at first to communicate our activities. And I've put also here the contact of the three co-lead of the working group, myself, Kyla Joshka, and Anish Subramanian. And that's it for my presentation. And I guess I'll stop sharing and open it to questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Shane. I enjoyed the presentation again. Are there any questions for Shane?
Actually, I have a question. Christoph, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. So what is your answer to the question in the blog? You know, this masquerading of variability as uncertainty. How would you respond to that?
How would I respond to that? Well, Kyla is giving a talk about it next week. And then, you know, you'll have to read the blog post when it gets revealed to the world. So,
all right.
and
your personal view?
Kyla is online, actually. So if she wants to jump in, maybe she can give you a teaser about it.
I like your answer, Shane. This is the idea is that there's a lot of spatial mismatch or temporal mismatch between in situ observations and satellite observations. And sometimes those make the satellite data look like they have big errors, but really it's just because you're comparing data on different scales. So you have to keep that in mind when you're trying to quantify errors on satellite measurements.
What do you mean with errors, if I may ask?
So when they, the example I use is salinity. So for the satellite missions, we compare satellite salinity with in situ salinity, right? And say, okay, there's differences between the satellite and the in situ measurement. That's got to be an error, right?
Okay.
In the satellite measurement, because we know the in situ ones are accurate. But really, some of the problem comes from the fact that the satellite measures over like a 50 or 100 kilometer scale and just makes an average measurement over that. Whereas the in situ measurement is at one point. So if there's a lot of horizontal variability in situ, the satellite's going to give you some average, and there's no way it's going to match up with the in situ measurement, because that's just sort of one realization of the salinity within that satellite footprint. So that's not an error on the satellite measurement. Mm-hmm. That's just a difference in how you've measured a certain region. Right. Anyway, that's the teaser. My talk is on Tuesday.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Kalia, I just wanted to jump in. Would you say that this type of error is more of a representation error or a modeling error?
Yes, I would call that a representation error.
Yeah.
So
I'm just throwing it out there because it seems that part of you know, the reason why maybe we need to have this discussion in this working group is that maybe we don't have a common language, such as, you know, talking about representation error, talking about statistical error, talking about instrumental error. And I believe, you know, in ocean sciences, we are faced with maybe, well, we'd like to think they're unique, but we are faced with very specific, you know, cases and consideration for which we need to have a reflection and maybe homogenize the language to make sure we're talking about the same thing.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, as I was thinking about this and writing this blog post, I feel like representation error is not something a term we use as observationalists very much. It's more of a term that modelers use. And so I fully agree that using the same terms across our different, even our different ocean communities, will go a long way toward helping us all say the right thing, that we're actually, say the thing we mean. So I am fully in agreement.
I've already started using representation error quite a lot. I hope it's not wrong. I like it. Shane, are you aware of any international equivalent effort under International CLIVAR or any other? Or is this truly a unique effort?
I mean, in terms of specific, you mean a general effort? I'm not sure. Maybe Kyla knows more about it, but I know for specific, topics such as salinity or temperature, there are some specific effort and, combination of people working specifically on comparing, let's say, observations to model or to remote sensing data. But in terms of, a more conceptual, homogenizing umbrella organization, I'm not sure. I mean, ocean best practice is definitely, I guess, addressing some of that. But right now, no, I'm not aware.
Okay.
Is anybody aware of maybe, we don't want to duplicate too much the effort of other people. So is anybody in the audience aware of another similar effort in other part of the world?
I know the SEUS Ocean System Design Working Group is working specifically on representation error and developing tools for users to quantify this error themselves in terms of like data assimilation.
Okay, what is SEUS?
It's the Southern Ocean Observing System. It's a small international body that has like sub-working groups to achieve their aims, and they're based out of here in Hobart, Tasmania. And yeah, so that's that organisation.
Great, thank you.
Maybe I should mention that on a national level, we are also working on that topic, not in particular to get remote sensing data and in situ data, to say consistent, but to look into the quantification of uncertainty on in situ data. And so there is some relationship to modeling as well, because in the end, my answer, by the way, to this masquerade is, if you cannot model a variability, it's uncertainty, just as a provocative statement. So that's something that we are discussing here in a small group in Germany. Would you agree with that, Shane, or?
No, I think I'm actually writing it down. If you cannot model variability, it's an uncertainty. I like that very much. Thank you.
It would be good to reach out to both of those groups and just swap stories. Any other questions?
Yeah. I was just going to say, like, in the spirit of like, how can ocean best practices and the working group interact, we could like share resources. We are compiling like some resources as part of the working group, and maybe we can find a good way to share those with the community, ocean best practices community.
Yeah, I think this is what we're trying to do with the website, where it's basically going to be open. But if you think, if we can think of some other ways, yeah, that'd be great as well.
So that it's easy for people that are looking in one place or the other to connect the two things. Because yes, I agree that, visiting the website, you will get all those resources, but someone that visits our website doesn't necessarily know of the other, way of for these resources. So if there is a way to even just put a link to go from one place to the other, could be helpful.
We're in the process of updating the Cortod webpage, and both Ocean Best Practices and Ocean UQ are going to have links.
Okay. Great.
I see the training that is proposed for Ocean UQ in year 3, and I think of the training effort that Ocean Best Practice Systems would like to develop, and I think there's a marriage there, even if it is a matter of just recording or documenting the Ocean UQ training and submitting it to the best practice. We might be able to do at least that or possibly more.
Yeah, so we haven't, the goal is for the group to discuss what is the best, format for that and how do we want to hold it. So, it's great that you're part of the group, Mark, because we can really try to coordinate and think where we converge, definitely.
Hey, Shane, I have a question. I haven't met you yet. Bob Eisenrather. I'm with NOAA's Center for Operational Oceanographic Products and Services. I'm going to give a talk on Wednesday on water level measurements. I've worked with Mark Bushnell on a number of projects over the years, most recently some of the IUS work. And so the IUS QA, QC efforts, as I'm sure you're aware, they focus on a set of parameters and sort of schedule and plan based on a set of ocean parameters. So I'm just curious, for the effort your group is pursuing, are you going to sort of chip away at parameters or focus on a specific list of things in terms of how you invest your resources and how you schedule different tasks for uncertainty quantification?
So what do you mean by chip away at parameters?
Oh, I'm just saying that it's there's a lot of different measurements that definitely require improved uncertainty quantification. I just am curious about if your approach is going to sort of focus on specific parameters and maybe going through a list and taking care of it.
I think so. We wanted to limit ourselves to physical variables at first, just to limit the scope of our activities. I don't think the goal of the group is to specifically talk about, come up with, numbers or recipe, let's say for temperature. I think we want to take a more, broader context and more of a philosophical or conceptual approach to the issue, try to suggest common rules or common language or common practices rather than focus specifically on a number of parameters. However, most of us, the oceanographers in the group are physical oceanographer, and some of us have worked on, the main principal physical variables such as temperature, salinity, or velocity. So I suspect, specific examples are going to be drawn from these variables. But I think we're trying to take a more broader, holistic approach rather than focusing on specific variables.
Thanks. And I'm definitely not aware of another international project tackling the same problem. So I'm interested in staying involved and hearing more throughout this week. And
awesome, thank you.
Okay, I think in the interest of time, we better move on. Thank you, Shane. And thank you. Shane's attending 2 conferences at once. I can't even do one. I don't know how you do it.
I think I'm going to stay with you, and I'm going to quit.
Excellent, excellent. So our next speaker is Stefan Seitz, and Stefan is with the PTB in Germany. That's their National Metrology Institute, where he is head of the electrochemical working group. And I had the pleasure of working with Stefan on a paper a couple of years ago and learned a lot from him. I look forward to hearing your presentation, Stefan.
Hey, thank you, Mark. I try to share my screen. Yeah. Okay, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Which one do you see, the presenters mode or just the slides?
I think it's just the slides.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, and I'm at the end. That's very good. So let's go to the beginning.
That's a good idea.
Okay. So thank you very much for the introduction, Mark. Yes, Mark and Christoph, they have asked me here to give a rather fundamental talk about uncertainty quantifications from the perspective of metrology. So that's what actually my talk will be about. But to begin with, first I maybe have to clarify a misconception that's often heard. Metrology is actually the science of application and measurement, so it must not be confused with meteorology. So our fundamental goal is basically to make sure that measurements results are consistent no matter where they have been measured, when they have been measured, who has measured them, and even if they have been measured using different methods and different instruments. So, and here, of course, measurement uncertainty plays a very, very important role. It's actually something of our main businesses. So, talking about measurement uncertainty, you often hear very different things, and many people have different conceptions about what is measurement uncertainty actually. So you find something like it's the deviation of an unknown deviation from an actually unknown true value, which is somehow blurry and specifically bad or difficult to get quantified. Or you hear something like it's the accuracy of a device as it has been stated by the manufacturer. So this is actually more something like a quality statement about the instrument, but not measurement uncertainty, or it is just a part of it. Or you find something like the standard deviation if you have performed several readings of a measurement, which gives you, of course, information about the stability, but it's just also just a part of the story. Or measurement error. Okay, this is heard very often, which is actually just the difference between a measurement result and a value indicated by some standard. So all of this is not completely wrong, but it's just a part of the story. So what's actually measurement uncertainty? There are quite a lot of definitions that you can find in some vocabulary, but at least to my understanding, which is more tangible, is that measurement uncertainty is actually the quantification of a doubt that you have when you do a measurement, because a measurement produces a number at the end of whatever kind of quantity, okay? But every scientist always has also some doubts about, have some doubts about his number, okay? And measurement uncertainty tries to quantify this. And why is there a doubt? Well, basically because of two impossibilities. The first one is, if you want to measure something, you have to define what you want to measure, and you actually have to define this very exactly. So if you have looked, for example, here at the length measurement of such a pencil, okay, you know, length depends on temperature, so you have to define the temperature. It's a pencil, it's of wood, so humidity might play a role, and so on, and so on, and so on. So you have to define it, and you can never do this exactly. You can never find all influencing parameters. And secondly, when you have defined it, you also have to realize your parameters, okay? So in this specific case, you need a heating or cooling system or whatever in order to have a temperature control, but you can never do this exactly. So there remains an uncertainty. Now looking at oceanography, of course, there is a huge number of different quantities, okay, over very different areas. So I would never dare making a general statement about how is uncertainty quantified or dealt with in oceanography in general. But what I've seen and what I've heard from talks with oceanographers, that there is often a rather more qualitative statement of uncertainty rather than a quantitative one. Okay, so you find something like an assessment of measurement methods in terms of they are mature and premature, or they are very new, or you have, especially in Argo, some kind of flagging system where you have some kind of integrity and consistency tests, and then there are some flags, and which gives you some kind of quality criteria. Very often, or sometimes, I don't know exactly, they are also correlated with quantitative assessments, but then it's more in general terms, more in terms like, if you use this best practice in this device, you can assume that you have a measurement uncertainty of whatsoever. But that's actually not really measurement uncertainty. So, but why do we actually need to quantify the doubt? Why is it so important to have quantities? Because at the end, each measurement is done because you want to compare two values or more. But nevertheless, you want to make a comparison between values. Now, how can you do this? You can only make such an assessment based on a good uncertainty of the individual values, because if the uncertainty is very small, you can say that these two values are different. But if the uncertainties are very large, you can just say, okay, maybe that's just the difference is just a variation, a variability, so they are actually the same. But if you have no uncertainty, you can say nothing. Well, and the second thing is, of course, you have to consider error, uncertainty propagation. If you want to do some kind of modeling, or if you want to derive quantities from your measurement results, of course, this can only be done if you have quantified the uncertainties in some way. So how are they quantified now based on metrology principles. Now, I guess the most important metrology principle is that of metrological traceability. I guess everyone is aware of this in the international vocabulary of metrology. Just to mention this, because we have just had the discussion about finding a common language. There is already a vocabulary existing which defines quite a lot of terms that are relevant in measurement in general, and also measurement uncertainty. But anyhow, coming back to metrology, metrological traceability, it's defined as the property of a measurement result relating the result to a stated reference through calibrations, each contributing to the stated measurement uncertainty. This is a little bit shortened, but basically it means what everyone knows, okay? You produce a number through a measurement. Here you use a ruler in order to measure the length of the pencil, but you need a scale, and you get this scale more or less through a calibration by a calibration lab. In comparing the scale to some kind of standard, and the number of the standard or the unit of the standard has been assigned by a metrology institute. So this value here is through a so-called traceability chain linked to the primary standard. Now, why is this very important for uncertainty? Well, because you can come into the situation, first of all, you have to, of course, be aware that there are 3 measurements involved with this simple example here, and all contribute to your uncertainty. And why is this so important? Because if you have a second measurement of actually the same thing, but following another route of traceability with other uncertainties, you can come up with completely different values. So that's why it's so important to quantify them and to consider all the uncertainties to the primary standards. Now, what are typical uncertainty contributions that have to be considered in an uncertainty budget in rather general terms, of course? There's always the indicated value, okay, which might be subject to some instability. Of course, the resolution of the indication system is important. Then there might be issues with long-term stability. The bias, if you do a calibration with respect to some kind of reference standards, is important. External effects that might affect your measurement. So here in this example, maybe the ground is not very flat, and this, of course, affects the measurement. And there are 2 very important contributions. One is what is called repeatability. So if you're doing the measurement, always more or less the same measurement using the same lab, the same operator, the same device, gives you a kind of variability of the results. And this is called repeatability that must be considered. You cannot avoid this. But even more important probably for oceanography is the reproducibility. That means if you want to compare results that are actually supposed to be the same because you're measuring the same thing, but you're using different labs, different operators, different devices, maybe even different methods, this gives you another kind of spread that must be considered, especially if you want to compare results like in ocean observation systems that are coming from different sources. Okay, what's the fundamental process if you're doing this in the metrological way? So what you're usually doing, you first have to define your measurement quantity very exactly, as I've told you at the beginning. Then you have to identify all the sources that are relevant for this specific measurement regarding the specific definitions that you have made. Then you quantify uncertainty ranges, which you assign to all the sources. You must also assign probability distributions to the specific ranges. And then at the end, you define this, multiply this range with a specific factor that depends on the probability distribution in order to get something which is called standard uncertainty. And this should actually characterize a range with an 80% probability to cover the actually true value. So this is close to what people understand also in terms of standard deviation. Okay, so you're in the range of a normal distribution somehow. So, and then if you have collected all them together, you calculate the combined standard uncertainty, and in order to, assign it to a specific range of probability, you multiply it with a coverage factor. So typically this is the coverage factor of 2, then which gives you a probability range of 95%. So this is, of course, more or less the very, 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 very light version. That's clear. I mean, this is the condensed version of uncertainty calculations. More details can be found in the so-called Guide to the Expression of Measurement Uncertainty, in short term GUM, that is available at the webpage of the BIPM. Well, I don't want to go further into the details of GUM, but is one distinction, and I think this is very important, and this is that there is a differentiation between two types of uncertainty. The first one is the more or less known one. Okay, you can use some kind of statistic in order to calculate your best estimate of your measurement result and the uncertainty. But then the makers of the GUM have had a really brilliant idea, and this was the invention of the type B measurement uncertainty, because very often you do not have the resources to do complicated statistics, okay? And then they offer the possibility, okay, if you don't have this, then you just use all relevant information that you have, okay? And this might be previous measurement data, your expertise as an expert, some manufacturer's specification, and so on. And then you make a good estimate, because having an uncertainty with a little uncertainty is better than having no uncertainty. Okay, just have a look at an example. Here I've just devised some kind of temperature measurement, okay, and I've defined it in this way, that the temperature sensor is mounted on a mooring 2 meters below the surface, and the measurement is taken 6 months after calibration, and it is the mean of 10 readings. So what are potential sources of uncertainty? You have a limitation due to the resolution of the reading, which might be 0.1 millikelvin. This is a typical rectangular probability distribution, because the value must be somewhere in this range. This would be the factor given by the GUM, and then this gives you the standard uncertainty. Stability can be expressed as typical standard deviation of the 10 readings, giving you another contribution. Well, and finally, you might consider the manufacturer specification of long-term stability, which is here given plus minus 0.2 millikelvin per month. So you have 6 months measurement. So this gives you 1.2 millikelvin uncertainty. But at the end, it's probably not very likely that the complete range or the drift will be that strong that it will be the most possible. So a triangular probability distribution is relatively reasonable. So and then you can go on, consider self-heating, maybe effect of solar radiation during the day, mounting the bias due to calibration, repeatability, reproducibility, and others, giving you at the end the final uncertainties, then a combined uncertainty. So this is just a very simple example, just to demonstrate a little bit how this can work. Now, calculating uncertainties, the bad news is it can really become sophisticated. Okay, if you go into the details, you have to consider an individual measurement. It may become complicated. And from what I've said so far, it should be obvious that it's practically impossible to have something like an overarching uncertainty calculation template that can be used more or less for every quantity, okay, just with a little adaptation. No, that's not possible. Actually, the sources of uncertainty must be identified and quantified by the respective experts, at least for each type of measurements. And as I've already mentioned, all the uncertainties along the traceability back to the standards must actually be considered, because they all contribute to the final results. The good news is there is uncertainty type B, which makes life much easier sometimes. Then you can accept actually an uncertainty of the uncertainty, because as I've said, have a uncertainty in the uncertainty is better than having no uncertainty at all. Well, and actually you just have to go once through the procedure. Once you have done it, you can automate it, and then it can be used again and again and again, maybe with a few adaptations. Now it's very interesting, because I want to point this out once again. Uncertainty, you must really be aware, is a property of the quantity value. Okay, it's a property of the number that you have generated by your measurement, and it's not assigned to a specific method or to a specific type of device or to a best practice. You cannot say because you measure, you use this or that best practice, you can assume an uncertainty of this or that value. No, you can just say, if I use this best practice, this offers me the opportunity to achieve some kind of uncertainty. But you nevertheless have to assess your measurement itself. But this has also an advantage, because you can actually use different methods or procedures in order to do a measurement. Here you have a simple example. Okay, you can either use a spring balance to measure the mass of this pot, or you can use a digital balance. Now this will give you a larger uncertainty, of course, because of the bad resolution than this one here. But the information, okay, is actually included already in the uncertainty. It's not necessary anymore to define or to put somewhere in the metadata what kind of device you have used, because the information is already included in the measurement uncertainty. So it actually provides you one number to characterize the result of a measurement, okay? And this brings me back to the point, and I was considering this when I've heard the discussion before about the satellite measurements and in situ measurements. So actually, this is not a problem if you do proper uncertainty calculations. And first of all, you cannot compare apples with oranges, okay? So you have always to talk about the same measurement quantity that you are comparing. But if you are comparing this, actually everything should be included in the uncertainty. So if a satellite measurement will produce some kind of uncertainty, and an in situ will produce some kind of uncertainty. So there can be not an error between these. There can just be different measurement uncertainties, and they should fit. Okay, so there's one last thing that I want to mention regarding measurement uncertainty. Measurement uncertainty is certainly one pillar of producing good measurement data and reliable measurement data that can be used for other purposes or some kind of user products. But I mean, at the end, each institute is more or less responsible for the measurement uncertainty calculation, and you never know if this is a good one or a bad one. So trust is good, but control is better. And the only way to control if there have been made good uncertainty estimates is to, in terms of comparison measurements. So what's meant by this, at each level of the traceability chain, actually the involved institutes should compare their results. Metrology institutes at the standards level, calibration laboratories at the user level. So, and those comparison measurements give you some kind of evidence for how good an institute is able to measure the uncertainty, or to measure, and which is the minimal uncertainty that they may actually state. So, well, in other areas, such structures exist already for a long time. So metrology institutes, for example, they compare their measurement standards by approved international comparison measurements, and the results of those can be found in the key comparison database of the BIPM. At the calibration labs level, there is the possibility to get an accreditation according to this ISO standard 17025, which also includes some kind of proficiency testing, which is usually a comparison measurement. And the same thing holds for the user communities in those areas, which also integrate such systems in their QA systems. So this is already successfully applied in industry and WMO. So how can this be applied in oceanography? Okay, honestly, here I don't know. I don't have the answer because I'm not directly from the community, and I'm aware that's a very huge community, a very diverse community. But nevertheless, in order to get reliable data, I think it's very important that this question has to be clarified relatively soon. So at the end of my talk, I would just like to make a little advertising because the European Association of Metrology Institutes, which is called Euromet, has created a so-called European Metrology Network for Climate and Ocean Observation. And its main task is indeed to assist in handling all metrology issues regarding standards, calibration, uncertainty calculation, and so on, related to the essential climate and ocean variables. Of course, the metrology community is not as large as the oceanographic community, so we can certainly not cover all the EOBs and ECBs that exist, and maybe even others. But at least I think it's worthwhile to get in contact if there is a need for assistance, and then we can see what we can do. So, and to end my talk, we have been asked to give a recommendation. Now, this is relatively easy in my case, I think, from what you've heard in my talk. I would advise, of course, to include advice on uncertainty quantification and best practices for specific quantities, okay? Especially, of course, considering metrology concepts. Okay, and with this, I've tried to condense more or less things that can actually be well put into lectures, but I hope I did not overwhelm you and you got at least something out of my talk. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you very much. Who's got questions for Stefan?
I will leave it for the time being. Yeah, Shane? But
thank you, Stefan, for your presentation. I think that was great. I really enjoyed it. So today I was emailing with a colleague in France, and I asked him, why do you use a 90% confidence interval to report your uncertainty? And then he pointed out to me that 90% uncertainty seems to refer to the common language, or like what people understand as being almost certain. So I was just wondering, in metrology, such as I think where you work in your institute, are you trying to refer the scientific language of uncertainty to maybe more common understanding of uncertainty from, let's say, the broader community outside of the scientific community? I'm asking you this because a lot of people, let's say in the IPCC report, have worked very hard in standardizing, their statement of uncertainty so that it can be used for policymakers, et cetera, et cetera. So I was just wondering if there's any effort to go along that way.
Well, I would say that the European metrology network that I've presented is our first step into this direction, okay? I also have to say, of course, that metrology comes or is closely related, or from its history, closer to industry, okay, rather than environmental science. And we are just stepping more or less step by step into other directions. And here, of course, it's more or less, well, the statistics and the language that has been used in this kind of area for decades. But I think they are not so different, okay? I mean, probably looking at the IPCC reports, I think probably they are not really talking about measurement uncertainty. They are rather talking in terms of, well, there are some statements, okay, and they want to make them readable and digestible for politicians, and so they try to put them in some easy categories. So I don't know if this is a good example. But regarding the effort to assign numbers or estimates that should give an indicator about the reliability of a result, okay, is not very different, because at the end, the same mathematics is used all over the places, like this confidence interval, okay? We typically use 95%, but that's just a small difference. But nevertheless, I think it's very often just that it has been mentioned before already, that we have to find the same language. I'm pretty sure that in many areas, the same thing is already done, okay? But people talking about this in different way, and they have different concepts. So it's not so much the words, but the concepts behind. And that's why I've talked today about meteorological concepts, okay? What's the concept of uncertainty? What's the concept of traceability? What's the concept of how I can compare? When can I compare results? That's what's important, and that's what should be exchanged, I think.
Can I ask a question? It's Christoph again. Thank you, Stefan, for your nice overview on these meteorological principles. My question to you is, it seems to me you're trying to avoid the term error. So is there a special reason for that? So, you know, we heard about representation errors or so. What is your perspective on this term?
Yeah, the point is that we try to, or in metrology, you really try to use proper language regarding measurements. And there is simply a definition for error. And the measurement error is simply the difference between an indicated result, if you measure a standard, and the indicated by the measurement instrument, and the value that is assigned to the standard. This is because it's the only way how to quantify a bias of a measurement instrument. Okay, you measure a standard, you know this standard, this length should be 1 meter. Then you take a measurement device that you measure the meter, but it's 1 meter 10, so you have an error of what 10, but of 0.1. But you can only, if you want to talk of an error, you always have to refer this to something, and the reference is simply the reference standards. While uncertainty, okay, is a much wider term, okay, because it really tries to include all the doubt that exists. So the measurement error is actually something that you can correct, because as soon as you know the error, you just subtract it or whatever you do, and then you can eliminate it. An error can be eliminated, that's the point. But measurement uncertainty cannot eliminate it, because there is doubt, there's always doubt. If you cannot define your quantity exactly, okay, because you do not know all the influence factors, then there remains an uncertainty. And if you are doing a measurement and you try to realize this definition, but you cannot exactly realize it, doesn't matter how much effort you take. And this also keeps some uncertainty. So uncertainty is much more than error. Error is just one thing. And we try to, in metrology, we try to stick to these terms. That's it.
If we have time, I have a question. My name is Rafael Ramos. I have a different perspective of this because my background is industry, and talking about the different languages in different areas. For industry, a best practice is something that is a lot more specific than what we're speaking about here. But I want to, by the way, that was a very good presentation, Stefan, and I have a question on that. You talk about in quantifying the total uncertainty, you need to know the uncertainty of each of the different processes that go into evaluating the final uncertainty. And then you need to do some assumptions, for example, I don't know, probability density functions and things like that. How can you ensure that all those assumptions are the same in different processes, in different parts of the world, in different labs? I mean, how can you make sure that a quantification on uncertainty from, let's say, one institute is equal to the one in the different institute, for example? How can you deal with that?
Yeah, you can deal with it, but you can't. Okay, so that was more or less the final remarks of my talk. Of course, you cannot. Okay, you are completely right, because I'm not doing what is doing another guy in another lab. Okay, but we can make a comparison. Okay, and that's the hour of truth. Okay, people can say everything, but as soon as they are compelled to provide a result and an uncertainty, then you see the spread of the results. And if they claim that they have a very small uncertainty, but they are far away from the mean, then you know, okay, they have done something wrong. So they have to increase their uncertainty. And I think this would be very important for ocean observation systems, because if you have an uncertainty, and if you have checked if the uncertainty statements that are given are really valid, okay, then you have everything in your observation system actually that you need in order to qualify the reliability of the data. But I admit, in such a huge community as oceanography, okay, which is very diverse, this is not a simple task to realize. In meteorology, it's relatively simple because you have, I don't know, in each country there's just one meteorology institute, and we meet once a year in Paris in order to discuss all these issues, and we have comparison measurements in a small group. So this is feasible. How to do this in oceanography? Okay, must be probably be more localized. Okay, self-organizing among groups, something like this. But this is difficult, I know, but I think in order to get reliable data, it's really necessary to have this.
Thank you.
Are there other questions for Stefan?
I have one. What do you think? Do we need a review around terminology and stuff like that, or self-organized reviews for different types of ocean observations, or has something like this already been done?
Not as well. There are. You're talking about comparison measurements now, right?
Yeah, like a synthesis of what is being used and statistical comparisons between different methods.
As far as I know, there are some small exercises that have been performed, okay, but not on a larger scale as far as I know. But I also have to admit that I'm probably the wrong person to ask this, because I mean, I'm not actually in the oceanographic community, and of course I do not have an oversight about all the different groups that exist and what they are doing and where they have performed comparison measurements and how they are dealing with this and how they are conducting them. But it was very interesting, just to tell you maybe this small story. There has been a comparison measurement among oceanographers around the Baltic Sea in measuring pH of seawater. And a colleague of mine has accompanied this, and he was really shocked how they dealt with the situation, I have to admit, okay? Because so everything which is our, well, everyday work, more or less, okay, if you do such a comparison to check the homogeneity and stability of the samples that have been around, to have some specific mathematics and how to calculate the comparison reference value and to define some degrees of equivalence and so on. This is all stuff that has, it seemed, not been known, at least by this group, okay? And so that's why I think it's really necessary that the communities interact, okay? Because there's the experience already available, okay, in the world. And well, I think that's why we should collaborate here.
I know for me, I've been involved with the Ocean Carbon Dioxide System group, and there is an ongoing intercollaboration group that was formed through OCB, and we're actually looking at doing more comparisons with pH and some of the other CO2 system measurements. But in terms of standardizing terminology, I think that those discussions are ongoing. So for me, I think there's definitely a need to do some sort of review or guidance for that.
We have time for one more question, if anybody's got one. Okay. Well, Stefan, thank you again. I've cobbled together a draft session report out and posted the link to it in the chat. I actually put it together before these guys spoke, and it's got a slant towards Ocean Best Practice System. Folks, please feel free to add to it if you like. I think we probably don't need to get into the details of the two presentations, just to say that Shane has demonstrated a need for it, and Stefan has presented a viable way forward. And we'll take it from there with the rest of the sessions. So if there's nothing else, let's take a few minutes break, and I'll see you back in the plenary in 5 minutes. Okay. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.